actors treading the boards, artwork on display in museums and films where they belong in the cinema. Culture is back here in France, and we're taking a look at some of the highlights in today's show. We're starting off here in Paris at the Point Virgule Theatre, one of those venues that's now welcoming live audiences. They're dealing with new restrictions, however. Capacity will be capped at 35%. But that hasn't dampened the mood for the cast and crew. Elodie Radnac, Julien Sauvager and Claire Rush report.
Centre stage once again. Urbain Courty is thrilled to be back in the spotlight, but after months of closure, he's grappling with stage fright.
Je l'ai vu vraiment pour tout le monde. Je ne cite pas des noms très connus, mais j'ai vu des gens très connus remonter sur scène, et vraiment, quand ça fait 6 mois, on a l'impression qu'on l'a plus fait depuis longtemps. Ça revient vite, mais la première fois, ouais, c'est extrêmement dur. Enfin, c'est comme si on l'avait jamais fait, en vrai.
For the reopening, new measures are in place.
Tu joueras avec masque ou sans masque?
Non, je joue sans. Non, j'ai jamais joué avec, pour le coup. Non, mais ça, j'ai pas trop... Là, les gens sont quand même relativement loin. En plus, on va être quoi, 35% si on est complet?
That number is set to increase to 65% on June 9th, and by July, all seating restrictions are expected to be lifted.
On est surtout très excités et on sait le public va être hyper indulgent, hyper friand, est en attente, est hyper excité. On sait que ça va rire, ça va applaudir 2 fois plus que d'habitude.
However, the reopening is not all good news. The limited capacity means the theatre will be operating at a loss.
C'était mieux de rouvrir à 35 que pas du tout réouvrir. Économiquement, c'est pas viable de toute façon, mais le fait d'avoir une personne au plateau, tout le monde peut prendre ce risque-là. Voilà, on y va en se disant on va s'organiser suivant la recette du soir, on va améliorer, on va s'ajuster, tout le monde va, on va trouver un terrain d'accord, si je puis dire, économiquement.
In the face of such economic difficulties, some theatres decided not to open at all on May 19th, such as the Lucenaire.
Économiquement, financièrement, réembaucher toute une équipe, faire avoir des frais de publicité, de promotion, de communication sur les spectacles, c'est extrêmement difficile, extrêmement compliqué. Et assez dangereux même pour notre économie.
The Parisian venue has opted to reopen in August instead, so it can finish a renovation project and ensure the best possible conditions for its audience.
Staying in Paris, a new exhibition at the Philharmonic has brought together 2 heavyweights from the world of music and photography. Jean-Michel Jarre and Sébastien Salgado are behind an initiative to raise awareness about the plight of the Amazon. Featuring some 200 black and white images of the world's largest rainforest, Amazonia is accompanied by a soundscape composed by Jean-Michel Jarre. Having documented the region for decades now, Salgado has expressed his concerns about Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro's environmental policy. The idea is to sound the alarm about this unique biosphere. Here's more from both of them.
My greatest hope is that together we can stop the destruction of the Amazon biome, that we can protect its indigenous communities. We need it, not just to keep them there, but we need it for the whole planet.
There were a lot of pitfalls in relation to a project like this. Not to fall into ambient music, world music, or into something too ethnic, and at the same time to manage to reflect the particularity of the Amazonian rainforest, and forests in general, which is the fact that all the sounds of a forest are totally independent of each other.
Next, the French capital's now home to a new outpost for François Pinault's art collection. The Bourse de Commerce will showcase exhibitions selected from some 10,000 contemporary pieces. This historical building was once the city's commodities exchange, and restoring the site has taken almost 4 years and more than 150 million euros. Its opening exhibition hints at the diversity of that collection, with installations from David Hammons, painting from Claire Tabouret, and a sound installation by Pierre Huyghe. Chinese painter Xinyi Cheng is representative of a new generation of artists to feature. We heard more from her about her approach to her work.
I remember that night we had dinner at a restaurant, and then we walked out and she had a cigarette, and when she lighted the cigarette, and she had a lot of lights, pink and reddish light on her face. And I think that moment, the time was kind of frozen and it felt like a very long moment. And I wanted to make my paintings like very short stories. Although they look like portraits, but for me, their situations.
And just a few steps away from the Bourse de Commerce, the Pompidou Centre is shining a light on the women who were key players in the history of abstract art. Women in abstraction reveal some of the invisible figures in the shift away from figurative art. Our reporters Ines Olagaray and Ellen Gainsford went to find out more.
Their names and faces aren't well known to the public, but all of these women played an important role in the history of abstract art. With its new exhibition, the Pompidou Centre is hoping to give them the recognition they deserve. Swedish artist Hilma af Klint, who worked at the start of the 20th century, was a pioneer of abstract painting.
It's a special case as she wasn't written out of history. She chose to be anonymous. She decided not to show her works. She broke with formal painting at the start of the century with the Swan series in 1915. And she played a key role in the birth of abstract art, a period that was very much linked to spiritualism.
At the start of the 20th century, due to the patriarchal society, many women didn't seek the same recognition as their male counterparts. Later on, several important women members of the movement found themselves overshadowed by their husbands, as was the case for Lee Krasner, the wife of Jackson Pollock, although the visibility of women artists also varied from country to country.
In Russia, women were able to study art much earlier, from around 1870, and due to the cultural atmosphere of the time, they were given wider recognition. In France, things were much slower. Women were only allowed into the Academy of Fine Art from 1900. This explains why they were less visible than their male counterparts in the 1910s and 1920s.
Olga Rozanova was a figure from the Russian avant-garde.
She was an exceptional figure, a Russian artist who painted these pieces around 1916. You can immediately see from their powerful form and use of color that they were masterpieces of abstract art. She's a prime example of an artist who hasn't been given the place she deserves in the history of art taught in schools.
Some women did make it into the pages of art history books, like the Ukrainian artist Sonia Delaney. But here, for the first time, she's exhibited with her maiden name, Sonia Delaney Turk.
Now to another exhibition which puts women front and centre. Memoria, Narratives from Another History, features 14 female artists from the African continent and from the diaspora expressing their interpretation of collective memory. That show's being held in Bordeaux as part of the extended Africa 2020 season here in France. Brian Quinn has the story.
Memory, the thread that runs through this exhibition, a collective memory passed through blood ties. Here, South African artist Mary Sibande pays homage to the women of her family, holding them up as superwomen. It's also a thread that runs through history, that of a nation's bloody slave-holding past.
Mary Sibande is really telling us about the history of South Africa, and in particular the condition of women during apartheid. So we see that we can pass from an intimate subject to a collective historical subject in a very natural way that really makes sense.
Throughout the show, the visitor is invited to question the link between history and the memory of events. The works offering not absolute truths, but rather possibilities of counter-narratives, a demystified reading of historical chapters. Dalila Delaes Bouzar is an Algerian painter. Princesses, this series of 12 portraits, revisits photos taken in 1960 by Marc Garaget, a French army photographer at the end of the Algerian War for Independence.
I wanted to erase the traces of war. I wanted to change the status of these women and let them stop being war victims. I wanted to give them back their dignity. As an Algerian, I refuse this heritage of victimhood. This is also a way to say that you can look at a certain event from multiple angles.
An invitation for reflection turned to a source of inspiration as these artists chart a path forward into the future.
Well, we're wrapping up the show with some more contemporary art as Giuseppe Pinoni conjures a solitary tree from the lagoon in Venice. The piece is entitled The Listener, and the installation accompanies the 17th International Architecture Biennale, which opens this weekend. We'll leave you with a glimpse of that. Otherwise, do remember you can get more arts and culture on our website. We're on social media too. There's more news coming up on France 24 just after this.
A tree revealing to us the fundamental aspects of nature and its consciousness. To find your voice, you need to listen.